Have you ever wondered what your neighborhood dictator does when the streetlights go out and the curtains close? What if the woman who slaps fines on you for a single blade of grass out of place is the one treating your backyard like her personal midnight playground? And what if every sneaky step she took was captured, time-stamped, and waiting like a loaded gun for the exact moment her fake smile finally cracked? Picture Willow Creek Estates, the kind of American suburb that looks like a postcard from heaven. Identical beige houses, lawns trimmed to military precision, and those cheerful little signs that scream, community first. But peel back the veneer, and you'll find the iron fist of Karen Whitmore, our HOA president for 8 glorious years. Karen didn't just enforce rules, she invented them on the fly depending on who had kissed her ring that week. Bird feeders, eyesore, solar panels, hostile to aesthetic harmony. My backyard workshop shed where I repaired vintage bikes as a side gig, straight up, unauthorized commercial activity, worthy of $250 fines every single month. I'd been labeled that difficult resident in the neighborhood chat for daring to ask why her own rose bushes were allowed to sprawl, while mine got citations for being too vibrant. Neighbors nodded politely and avoided my eyes at the mailbox cluster. I just smiled, installed a proper fence, motion sensors, and a no-nonsense security system after the last harassment campaign. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep raccoons out and record whatever wandered in. I never dreamed the thing wandering in would be Karen herself. The first alert hit my phone at 2:13 a.m. I almost ignored it, figuring another raccoon was raiding the compost. The second alert showed a human silhouette halfway over my 6-foot fence. By the third ping, the figure had dropped into my yard with the confidence of someone who thought the night belonged to her. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering but mind crystal clear. Karen Whitmore, in black yoga pants and a hoodie that still somehow screamed, "I'm better than you," was tiptoeing across my grass like a budget ninja. Her heels, yes, she wore heels for stealth, sank straight into the damp soil. She froze, muttered something that sounded suspiciously like the kind of word she'd fine you $100 for saying aloud, then aimed her phone flashlight right at my workshop shed. I didn't run outside. That's the beauty of patience. I stayed right there, phone glowing in the dark, watching the live feed in glorious 4K. The wide-angle camera caught her face perfectly when the motion light snapped on, pure deer-in-headlights panic mixed with that signature Karen indignation. She waved her hand at the light like it was a peasant who'd forgotten its place. "For community safety," she hissed to herself, as if saying it out loud would make the trespass legal. She tried the shed door handle, crouched low, circled the structure twice, even poked at the power conduit like she expected to find a meth lab instead of bike tools and half-finished paint jobs. Every frantic step was logged, timestamp, path, duration. The system didn't care that she was President Karen. It just recorded a body crossing a restricted boundary. I almost laughed out loud when her yoga pants snagged on a low branch and ripped with an audible tear. The queen of decorum reduced to cursing under her breath while trying to shoo away a light she herself had once tried to ban as aggressive. Oh honey, nothing screams leadership like trespassing in torn Lululemon at 2 a.m. She finally gave up after 10 minutes of fruitless snooping, scrambled back over the fence with all the grace of a drunk raccoon, and disappeared into the night. The logs closed neatly. Entry, exit, full path map, heat signature overlay. Evidence that didn't negotiate, didn't care about her title, and most importantly, didn't forget. By morning, the HOA group chat was already buzzing about recent security concerns and unauthorized backyard structures. I sipped my coffee and watched the sun rise over a yard that looked perfectly innocent. At 9:07 a.m., her email arrived, formal, cold, dripping with that fake professional courtesy she wielded like a weapon. Due to multiple resident complaints regarding possible violations of community standards, the HOA board requests access to inspect your property. Less than 7 hours after she'd been rooting around my shed like a raccoon with a clipboard. The timing was so perfect it was almost artistic. I didn't answer right away. People like Karen thrive on momentum. They push. They escalate. They fill every silence with pressure. I let the silence sit. Instead, I exported the footage, labeled the folder Karen's Midnight Adventure, and made 3 backups. Around noon, I stepped outside like it was any other Tuesday, waved to Mrs. Henderson across the street, straightened a loose paver. Karen was pretending to inspect her own roses, the ones that somehow never got cited. She shot me quick, nervous glances, jaw tight, phone glued to her hand. The woman who once marched up to my door with a printed violation notice now couldn't even make eye contact. That's when I knew she hadn't found whatever she was hunting for, and the fear was already eating her alive. By mid-afternoon, the first rumor reached me through a trusted neighbor whispering over the hedge. Karen mentioned reports of unauthorized nighttime equipment and possible noise violations coming from your place. Vague enough to sound official, specific enough to poison the well. I thanked her calmly and went inside. Inside, I replayed the footage again, not angry, just fascinated by the sheer audacity. She'd gone straight for the shed, circled it like a shark, checked corners she had no business checking. This wasn't enforcement. This was a desperate fishing expedition for leverage. And when she came up empty, she decided to paint me as the villain instead. That evening, the board meeting notice dropped. Emergency session on community safety. My name wasn't listed, but everyone knew. I showed up early, sat in the back, notebook blank, phone charged. Karen strode in last, heels clicking like gunfire, posture rigid. She launched into her usual sermon about protecting property values for the children, while carefully avoiding any mention of nighttime inspections. When she finally glanced my way, it was pure challenge. I raised my hand politely. Quick question. President Whitmore, I said, voice even. Has the HOA ever authorized any board member to conduct inspections on private property after midnight? Her smile faltered for half a second. Of course not. That would be completely inappropriate. I nodded. And has any board member entered a resident's yard without permission in the last 48 hours? The room went graveyard quiet. She answered no a little too fast. I sat back down without another word and let the silence do the heavy lifting. People started shifting in their seats, glancing between us. Karen wrapped the meeting early, citing time constraints, but her voice had lost its usual velvet edge. The next morning, her second email arrived, longer, more desperate, now CCing the entire board and quoting bylaws like scripture. She was anchoring herself to procedure because the truth was circling like a shark. I replied agreeing to an inspection, but only daytime, with written notice, and a neutral third-party observer. She agreed instantly. Too fast. That alone told me she was scared. The inspection day, she arrived right on time, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 uncomfortable board members who clearly thought this was routine. Karen avoided my eyes as she crossed the threshold, launching into her rehearsed lecture about compliance verification. I let her talk. She checked everything except what she really wanted, the shed. When we finally reached it, she slowed, circling it exactly like she had at 2 a.m., asking technical questions that went nowhere. Power source, noise output, purpose? I answered calmly with documentation ready. Nothing hidden, nothing illegal. Her frustration was leaking through the polite mask like cheap foundation in the rain. One board member finally cleared his throat. Is there anything specific we're looking for here? Karen snapped her clipboard shut. Everything appears in order. The speed of her dismissal was almost comical. As they left, she lingered a step behind, eyes sharp. For a split second, I thought she dropped the act and threatened me outright. Instead, she gave that tight little smile and said, "Thank you for your cooperation, neighbor." The word neighbor tasted like poison in her mouth. That should have ended it for any sane person. But Karen wasn't sane. She was cornered. The real escalation started quietly. New proposed fence regulations appeared on the HOA portal, conveniently targeting my exact setup. Expanded surveillance authority in boundary zones. Neighbors started asking questions, repeating her phrasing word for word like good little parrots. Behind the scenes, emails flew, some accidentally including me, revealing panic about liability and unauthorized actions. One board member asked point-blank whether any motion logs existed that might complicate things. Karen replied 5 minutes later, insisting there was nothing to worry about. That night, she left a voicemail from an unknown number. Voice stripped of its public polish. We should talk. Just neighbor to neighbor. Misunderstandings happen. I saved it, added it to the folder, and smiled. The rumors sharpened. I was spying on residents, collecting data, running illegal equipment. The community tone shifted from confusion to discomfort. People don't like being used as pawns. A retired engineer posted publicly asking about the HOA's own liability for trespass. Karen's response was delayed. In that silence, the first cracks appeared. I requested the board code of conduct. Buried in it was the exact clause prohibiting unauthorized entry onto private property. I highlighted it and waited. Another mandatory board meeting was called urgent. Vague agenda. When I walked in, the atmosphere had changed. No chatter. Karen sat rigid at the front, hands clasped white-knuckled. She looked less like a president and more like a defendant. The meeting jumped straight to board conduct concerns. A member cited recent overreach. Another mentioned legal risk. When the floor opened, I stood calmly. My security system recorded a board member entering my property without permission during nighttime hours. The logs are complete, time-stamped, and verifiable. I didn't name her. I didn't play the footage. I didn't need to. The room went dead silent. Karen's face drained of color so fast her perfect makeup looked clownish. She laughed, sharp, brittle. That's a serious allegation without proof. I nodded politely. I'd be happy to provide the documentation to the board privately. I emphasized privately because looking reasonable mattered more than vengeance. The chair called a recess. Karen fled to the hallway, 2 members following with urgent whispers. When we resumed, she denied everything again. The word fabricated slipping out like a confession. That's when another board member dropped the bomb. Didn't you send an email earlier referencing a brief nighttime check for safety? Karen's head snapped toward him, eyes wide. Her authority cracked right there in real time, not with a bang, but with the soft, pathetic sound of a queen realizing her crown was plastic. The meeting ended with an internal review announced. No drama, just procedure. But everyone knew who it was about. Karen objected, but her voice no longer carried. Doors closed quietly. Conversations happened in corners. People avoided her like she was contagious. By midnight, the community forum lit up with speculation. The next day, her attorney sent a certified letter demanding I preserve all records and not distribute footage. You don't send letters like that unless you know you're exposed. My own attorney reviewed everything and simply said, "This is cleaner than most cases I've seen." Karen tried one last Hail Mary, a mass email announcing she was stepping back temporarily for health reasons. It was damage control wrapped in fake grace. It didn't work. Someone posted anonymized timestamps. Someone else connected them to the new fence rules. The story assembled itself without my help. The independent review moved like lightning once lawyers got involved. Requests for emails, messages, old meeting notes. Suddenly, board members were frantically checking their sent folders, remembering every time Karen had told them to just trust my judgment. I provided my records exactly as asked, no emotion, just facts. The questions were precise. Permission granted? Prior notification? Threats made? I answered honestly, including the voicemail and the coordinated rumors. A former board member who'd resigned months earlier reached out. She'd been pressured into late-night checks, too, and refused, then got pushed out. She offered to testify. The community tone flipped from confusion to quiet outrage, the dangerous kind that comes when people realize they've been manipulated for years under the banner of order. The preliminary summary referenced patterns of unilateral action and conduct inconsistent with fiduciary responsibility. Karen's name appeared once, but it was enough. Neighbors who once defended her went silent. Others started sharing their own horror stories, surprise finds, denied requests, emails that felt like threats. My fence wasn't the exception. It was the first thing that got caught on camera. Karen's attorney fired off letters challenging the review's scope and warning about defamation. The committee acknowledged them and kept rolling. Facts have momentum. You can't stop them without crashing into something bigger. I attended the closed meeting with counsel present. Karen sat at the far end of the table, silent, eyes fixed on the wood grain. They asked if she'd entered my property without permission. She claimed implied authority. They asked where that authority came from. She had no answer. They slid the printed timeline across the table, her phone location data matching the motion logs exactly. That was the moment she exhaled in resignation, not relief. The recommendation came 48 hours later: permanent removal for cause, legal review of certain actions, policy overhaul to prevent future overreach. Surgical. Devastating. Karen deleted her social media. Her name vanished from the HOA website overnight. It was like watching someone get erased in slow motion. The final board vote was short and final. Diane, sorry. Karen was removed effective immediately. A formal apology issued to the community. Her little empire of fear and petty tyranny was over. That night I stood in my yard. The fence solid. The sensors humming softly. Nothing looked different. Yet everything had changed. Power had shifted back to where it belonged. Neighbors walked slower now. Talked more openly. The new leadership rewrote inspection rules, clarified access protocols, limited surveillance authority. For the first time, those updates sounded like promises instead of threats. A few weeks later, I heard Karen had quietly tried for an HOA position in another development across town. The interview didn't last long. Background checks have a funny way of surfacing documented timelines. She listed her house without fanfare. The sign went up one morning and disappeared weeks later. One night, months afterward, my phone buzzed at almost the same hour, 2:13 a.m. Just a raccoon sniffing the shed, utterly unimpressed by history. I watched for a second, smiled, and rolled over. That's when the absurdity finally hit me. A woman who believed a title gave her permission to break the very rules she weaponized against everyone else. A career built on intimidation and midnight snooping, undone by censors that never raised their voice once. I never had to scream. I never had to confront her in rage. I simply let the truth exist, logged, time-stamped, patient, until the right people noticed. Because here's the thing about control: it only works in the dark. Turn the lights on, even for one night, and suddenly there's nowhere left to hide. Power doesn't vanish with fireworks. It leaks. And once the record starts speaking, even the mightiest Karen can't shout loud enough to drown it out. In the end, the quiet guy with the cameras didn't need revenge, just patience and proof. Never underestimate how fast a bully's throne collapses when the rules she loved so much finally apply to her too.